Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Fantastic, as always. This week we're taking on a short and commonly used practice in aviation. We're going to talk all about the passenger safety briefing today. And I think there's a lot of differing views and thoughts on what has to happen or what should happen. And we're going to dive into all of those today. Wally, you've administered 500 plus check rides today. You've done 500 plus professional flights in the last few years. What are your thoughts around a passenger briefing? How good do your applicants do, and how important is it for your professional flights at your major airline?
Well, the applicants, I think, actually do a fairly good job. It's sometimes a little bit awkward. Usually what I will tell my applicants is that I'm a novice flyer. I don't go in as, I don't tell them I'm the seasoned flyer. I'll tell them that I've never flown in a small airplane. I'll tell them that I've flown larger commercial airplanes, but I've never been on a small airplane, and that I'm a little bit nervous. So I'll get them to brief me under those conditions, and sometimes it's a little bit awkward. There's maybe a 45-hour private pilot candidate over there, and he's briefing me on everything that he knows I know, but he still has to brief it. But in general, I think they do a pretty good job. The only regulation that really addresses it is in 91, and it's 107, and it's 91-107, use of safety belts, shoulder harnesses, and child restraint systems. And to actually cover what the regulation says, that's really it. I think most of our people take it a little step further. There is there are some other regulations. I think it's 519 is a very good reference, and I'm just checking. Yeah, 519 under passenger briefing. The thing is that this falls under subpart F, which is for large and turbine-powered airplane. So our typical 172 or our Warriors are not large and turbine-powered airplanes. But if you look at 91-519, it talks a little bit more. It says that we should brief passengers on, obviously, the use of safety belts and shoulder harnesses, but it does talk about emergency equipment. It does talk about exits. It does talk about smoking and that sort of thing. So although it doesn't really cover us in our small airplanes, it's a really good reference point.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, if you search the internet, that one's the one that comes up. And I think a lot of people are misinformed or misguided when they search Google and find that passenger briefing in 91-519 is the regulation. Then I think they've fallen into a trap of that applies to them when it doesn't, because it's part of another subpart. But as you said, it's good stuff, and it references another subpart for operations under fractional ownership, which also could confuse a reader of the regulations that think they have to abide by those rules as well, which is really more crew and obviously operational around a crew for Part 91 fractional ownership operations. So I think the key here is I was misinformed. I thought there was some more regulatory requirements than what there are under 91-107. So seek out the right information. I probably fell into a trap of believing Google, but it is regulatory in nature. We do have to share safety belts, safety harnesses, and those things of the like. But that's where I guess the regulatory stuff ends for a person flying a single engine non-turbined aircraft, and that's the majority of probably our listeners in GA and the majority of the people that are flying at this flight school for sure.
The other thing that Google may lead you down a wrong path about is that it may direct you to Part 135 or Part 121. Mm-hmm. Part 135 air taxi and 121, larger operations, because the passenger briefing is regulated within those sections of the FAR. So, Google is a great thing, but make sure it's taking you to the right place.
Right, no doubt. So we talked a little bit about the regs, probably the most boring stuff. Let's talk about how do we really do this in the check ride and in real life. I don't know where I got it originally, but I have since refound it. FAAsafety.gov is a great place to go and learn about safety topics and safety things and attend wings events, etc. But there is a document out there on the General Aviation Passenger Safety Briefing, and it comes with a little card that I made on cardstock and just shared it with Wally so he can share it with his other applicants and students in the future. But it is the word safety. The acronym is SAFETY, and it's one that every pilot should know, general aviation for sure, because it gives you a cheat sheet to go through and help you guide your conversation with a customer. And in the show notes for this show, we're going to put out our first video that'll be on our YouTube channel and our social media pages about how to really prepare and deliver a passenger briefing before you start the engines and make it usable to your passengers. So first, S in safety really is the seat belts, that they're fastened for taxi, takeoff, and landing. If they're shoulder harnesses, how they're fastened, and that they need to be on for takeoff and landing. And then seat positions, quite often, and it's really weird. Lately, for whatever reason, we've gotten in the air, and some of my crew members and my family have not had their seat where they wanted it. And I think out of habit, they've always had it where they wanted it by happenstance, and then all of a sudden the seat's too low or the seat's slidden too far back, and they didn't tell me before we got in the air. It's easy to make those adjustments on the ground, a little bit more difficult to crank your seat up 2 inches when you're in the air and the doors are closed and you're flying 145 knots, right? So I would think about the seat belts, shoulder harnesses, and then seat positions, and go over those with your passengers before you got airborne. Not all the planes have risers, and not all planes maybe have shoulder harnesses, but you should be aware of those in your aircraft and go over them. Next is the A in safety, and that's really the one we use for air vents and all environmental items, right? How does cabin heat work? How does cabin air work if I want cabin air? How do I turn the cabin air off? Here in Houston, Texas, we probably all want every hole and air vent open on the ground. And if you got up to 8,000 feet today, it's probably 60 degrees outside right now. You get to 8,000 feet, it's going to be a chilly flight. So you're going to want to close all those air vents, open up that cabin heat, and make sure all those environmental items are taken care of. And then actions for other kind of passenger discomfort or comfort might be discussed at that point. We joke about it a lot, but I carry probably a half dozen sick bags in my own flight bag, and I don't ever leave them in my flight bag. I stick them in every side pocket and back pocket of seats that I can to make them available to new passengers for me. And that's where I would probably use my passenger briefing to point those sick bags out, and make sure people knew how to get to them and then how to use them as well. Because, I think we take that for granted, but you hand that blue ring to someone, they might not know how that bag works and that it's really a bag. They look at that thinking it's a lid for a jar or something, right? Doesn't really naturally look like a sick bag, and you might have to demonstrate how that thing comes out and how to twist it so that it doesn't stink up the place. And there's some learning how to use in that bag as well.
Right.
Next, the F in safety is fire extinguisher. I don't think there's a reg anywhere that requires a fire extinguisher to be in these single engine aircraft. At this flight school, we made an investment 18 months or so ago and redid all of our fire extinguishers in all of our aircraft and mounted them where pilot and co-pilot could get to them. And we check them on the checklist to make sure they're in the green, which means they're charged accordingly and that they're not expired. But you need to at least show your passengers where they're at and at least demonstrate how to use them. I think it was last week when we were recording, Wally, we both said, I don't think we've ever used a fire extinguisher in real life, but we both had opportunities to use them in training and whatnot, but never had to point it at the lower part of a fire and put something out.
Right.
You might need to have that conversation with your passengers too. If two seasoned pilots have never really used one, we've checked one a lot, but might be something to show them how to get it out of the buckle. That by itself might be something that they don't know how to do, and it sure would be a shame if there was a small fire and they had a fire extinguisher and they didn't know how to get it out of the buckle to be able to use that fire extinguisher.
Yeah, definitely.
Most of them have a safety latch on them too. You got to pull a pin or something. I don't think you have to demonstrate pulling that pin, but normally that's got some sort of a tie wrap that's easily breakable, but that tie wrap's intended to hold those in. So you might demonstrate how to unlatch, pull the pin, and then point if there is such a fire. But something to think about for sure.
And E stands for exit doors. So that's self-explanatory. Most of these airplanes are going to have one or two. If you're in a Cessna, you'll have two, and a Piper or a Beechcraft, maybe one. But make sure your passenger knows how to use the door. There could be a situation where you do a forced landing and you as the pilot are incapacitated, and it would be to everybody's advantage for the passenger to be able to get us out of the airplane.
Yeah, what else in the E? I mean, there's more than just that in the E. And one thing I'll throw out is in my twin, I know on the passenger behind the pilot's seat, there's a window that is not necessarily an exit, but there is emergency capabilities on that window,
right,
where you can
right,
pull a lever that will then make it easy to break two pins so that window will fall into the aircraft, making another exit, potentially maybe the only exit in that aircraft. And while in a lot of the training exercises we do, we don't have passengers in the back seat, you should be able to brief your passengers on any item like that in the aircraft that you're flying for them.
And emergency or survival kit, if we happen to have any. Some airplanes that are doing some more mountain type flying, there may be a survival kit, first aid kit, possibly, but any kind of extra equipment that we might have on board the airplane.
Perfect. T is for traffic, and talking. Traffic and talking. I think when I have my kids fly with me, I try to get them to help me spot planes. I think that you can create some fun around this, where you're having people try to spot towers and other traffic in the air. It's no matter how far away it is, I always tell people to call it out, because I might not see it, and what they think is really far away might not be as far away as they think, or that gap might close really, really quick, right? If you're flying and there's a citation coming at you at 250 knots and you're doing 100 knots, that close rate's going to be pretty quick. That's about 5 miles a minute, right? That they're covering that ground on you, maybe even more than that. So be prepared that's going to catch up to you really, really quick. So everybody should be pointing things, whether they think you see it or not. And then the talking piece, this is probably something that I'm not great at, because I love to share aviation and talk people through everything going on at all times in the flight. But there are times where during takeoff and landing, for sure, the cockpit should be sterile, and you shouldn't be talking about anything that's not important to the flight or the landing or the takeoff. And I'm sure in your airline you have real rules, Wally, about a sterile cockpit. What are your de facto rules that you can't break in the airlines?
Yeah, basically below 10,000 feet, anything that is not safety of flight related is prohibited.
Yeah, and I watch Air Institute stuff from time to time, and almost every time there's an accident in a bigger corporate jet or a jet of some sort over the last 50 years, and it's at landing, there's almost always some sort of gibberish going on that's not related to that flight. The guys are distracted, or they're talking about something that's not really related to the landing or the execution of that flight.
Right.
And then the why is a big one, and one that you should understand that this is new to a lot of people. While we might be pilots and have hundreds of hours or thousands of hours, not everyone gets the opportunity to go fly around the patch. And if this is their first time in an aircraft, you need to ask them what their questions are. So why is for your questions, and you should encourage everyone in the plane to speak up no matter what they see, hear, smell, whatever it might be. They should not think anything's common. And even if we're quiet for more than 20 minutes and they think that's a problem, they should raise their hand and speak up before we get to that 20-minute mark. Do your applicants do a good job of asking for questions, Wally? Is this cheat sheet something that they use on a regular basis?
I think they do. In general, I think they do a pretty good job. I would say the vast majority of them do ask if I have any questions. Good. And I will always query them about smoking. I will tell them that I'm a nervous flyer and I've never flown in an airplane this size, and that when I get up to altitude, to calm my nerves, I'm probably going to light up a cigarette, which is not really the case. I'm not a smoker, but that's what I tell them, and they'll immediately say, "Oh, there's no smoking allowed," and that's fine because they've covered everything, and by and large, I think they do a pretty good job. The problem is that when they get to me and we're talking about a private pilot applicant, up until now, every flight that they have flown, the person they have briefed is a CFI, and the person they have briefed is more experienced in the airplane. And so we're trying to do some role playing where they're taking just a friend for an airplane ride. So this is a little bit different now because with the CFI, I when they're briefing the CFI, I hear them giving a lot of technical stuff, and maybe to a passenger who you're just taking for an airplane ride, maybe that's not really the thing that you want to do. Maybe it's not appropriate. Maybe you may just end up scaring your passenger with all this stuff. I mean, we are just getting in an airplane. We're going to put the seatbelt on, and we're going to learn how to close the door, and how to get the air vents going, and in a nutshell, that's it. We want to be safe, so we want them to know where the emergency equipment is. But don't try to overdo it. But it is required, and of course the seatbelt thing is required, but everything else is good practice.
Yeah, when I first started flying, I took a discovery flight at a big aviation school, and I think the CFI was doing all of the trying to sell me flight training and get me excited and doing the pre-flight and the pre-flight conversation. I think he said the word crash or die like 18 times in a matter of the first 15 minutes before we ever got to the plane. I told the guy, this is not making me feel very comfortable. I knew what he was doing was probably being regulatory and trying to get all this important information out, but there is a better way to do it than say if we crash or those types of things while you're giving a passenger briefing, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the practical use and some really good examples. Often we talk about chair flying around here, Wally. There's no reason why I can't chair fly a passenger briefing and have my wife or girlfriend or friend or boyfriend sit down and go through it with them and ask them, what did I say that might have scared you or might have turned you off that I shouldn't say? Because if you know a scary flyer and you were to chair fly a passenger briefing, I think they'd give you the real feedback. Yeah,
I think so.
So some other things that we haven't talked about were on the safety cheat sheet, and some of them kind of were, but not in the exact same way, is really the communications aspect of an event. If there was an incident of some sort, do you have a way for your passengers to communicate if there is an emergency? And the best example that I've ever heard is if you carry a handheld radio before you commence that flight, you should probably tune it to 121.5. Turn it off, put it in its case and holder, but then demonstrate it to your passengers on where it's at, how to open it, how to turn it on, and how to push the button to talk. That could be the difference between life and death if you, as the pilot in command, became incapacitated.
Yeah.
If you have family members and you fly regularly in the same aircraft or same type of aircraft, it might be worth a point in time to teach your family members how the console radios work, how to flip stations or channels, maybe create a cheat sheet for them that they can carry with them when they fly. so that if for some reason you did become incapacitated, that they could at least tune the radio to 121.5 and get help, or at a minimum talk to whoever the radio's tuned to already, and how the push to talk buttons work, and maybe some switches on that audio panel that can get them set to where they can talk to someone for sure.
Right. And I think most non-pilots are intimidated by all the jargon and the terminology that we use on the radio, and but I think it would be prudent to tell your passenger, hey, if something like this were to happen, just speak in plain English. Just key the mic and tell the controller what's going on using your own words.
No doubt. And a little sense of urgency in your voice is probably going to get you more help too. So don't try to stay calm. Just tell them what you need and where you need it, and they'll get it to you. There are, on these small single engine aircraft, there's ways that the doors can stay latched open. And if you were in a descent because you've lost an engine, you know you're going to land off the field, it's a pretty good idea to open those doors and to latch them to where they can't close again, because you definitely don't want to be stuck in an aircraft because the doors are jammed. And that's really just a demonstration of opening the door and then in a Cessna pulling that lever all the way up. Some aircraft have a push button on the inner frame of the door that you can push that'll, in essence, lock the pin out so that the pin won't latch or go close the door, etc. So if those options are on your aircraft, make sure you demonstrate those as well. It's not truly survival gear, but I never fly without one or two pocket knives handy in my fly bag or in my pocket. One of my very first instructors said, you sure would hate to land even on a good runway and be stuck in the aircraft because you couldn't undo your seatbelt and get out if it was for some reason on fire or damaged. And that's a tip I've never let leave my brain, to where I want that knife handy to where I can cut those seatbelts off, because you're not going to tear a seatbelt in an aircraft for sure.
No.
And you might want some other survival gear. Last year around the holidays, we did some Christmas gift ideas stuff, and we're all hard to buy for if we're lucky enough to have the things we have. And a gift card to a survival/camping store might be a really good gift for a pilot, so that they can put together a small survival kit. One of the best things that I haven't carried, but I've learned about before recording this show, that I'm going to put in my fly bag, is one of those survival blankets. It looks like space film, big silver sheet that probably would fit in your wallet if it needed to. Really good if you landed somewhere and were cold, but even better to help people see you if you're on the ground, right? If it's a sunny day and you're waving one of those blankets in the air, I have a feeling somebody's going to see that reflection, and you're going to get some really some desired help, no question, for sure. Another cool tip that I saw was teaching your passengers where the ELT switch is. We might land off field sometime and not hit hard enough to set the ELT off, right? That's a crash sensor in those ELTs, right? You're going to have to hit with some real force and some G's. I don't know the exact number, but if you didn't land hard enough to set the ELT off, it should be something that you might want to tell your passengers where that switch is, so that if you were incapacitated again, they could flip that switch on and then get you some help. And we talked a little bit about the towers and traffic. I would make a game out of that for sure, and maybe keep a scoreboard and keep my passengers really busy and occupied helping me see things, always reminding them that if they see it, don't assume I see it for sure, and let's talk about it and make sure we're having a safe flight. Anything you could add there, Wally, for passenger briefing?
I would just say you have to just feel the temperament of your passenger. I mean, we certainly don't want to go out there and scare somebody with, like you said, probably don't want to use the word crash a bunch of times, or emergency or that kind of stuff. But, so I guess what I'm saying is your briefing may be different from one flight to the other, depending on your audience. And this is not stuff that you certainly need to brief with the same person every time. I mean, once they've heard the briefing, they've heard the briefing. But just be careful. again, we don't want to scare anybody, but we do want them to be in a situation to, if they need to get out of the airplane with you being incapacitated, we want them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think a thought that jumps in my brain when you say that is, my wife hasn't flown with me in quite some time. I do think if she were to fly with me this week, I would need to reteach her a few radio items, right? Where I keep my handheld radio and maybe how to push the talk button so that she can communicate with someone if there was an emergency. Well, I have briefed her on that in the past. The gap in flights is so big now that maybe she would need to hear that stuff again.
Yeah.
So just be thoughtful of that as well. And I do think if I were to take up 2 smaller teenagers for their first flight today, I would talk about exit to the rear if we leave the aircraft, but I don't think I would do too much more than safety belts and exit to the rear when we get out of the aircraft, because there's no real need and regulations that make me do any more for them that's going to change the fun fight that we're about to take and have.
Right.
Tons of resources out there. We'll put a link in the show notes to our Behind the Prop short video on passenger briefings to help all of you during your training and after you're done training. And there's a couple of pretty cool AOPA resources that we'll put out there in our show notes as well. Good video on safety briefings for your passengers as well. And as always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.